Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Today we are doing a mega video on how to get started with the crown for Armoured Clash. We'll be talking about what you can buy for building up your collection, how you can use that collection to build a functional army within the game, and what the different types of units do in an Orbat Deep Dive. Now, I'm using the Wayland Games website to show you what you can get for the faction. Now, the first way you can start is by getting the introductory set that exists here. That one is more if you want to slow build your force. It comes with 2 regiment sprues and 2 armored sprues. Comes with the quick start rules and some dice so you can get going along with the templates. But it mostly lacks the full rule book. And it mostly lacks the Command and Conquest deck that you will not have in here and will have to buy later on. But if you want to go for a slow building process, this is probably your best starting off point. After you've mastered those quick play rules, you can dive into the full game by buying the rulebook separately, along with a Command and Conquest deck, which you will need to play with the full rules, and also more dice should you so desire. And if you then want to expand your force with more miniatures, you can do so by buying the Sovereign Battle Group set. That one will include a large resin Landship in this case, and will have 2 of the Armoured Regiment sprues in there, because some of the weapons will need to be used on this box as well. Alternatively, you can opt for the smaller regiment boxes. Now, the regiment boxes are designed in such a way that they either expand a unit that you already own from your introductory set, or that you can use to make a completely new unit in the game, and I'll explain that in a bit once we get to the Orbat part. Alternatively, if you do not want to go for the slow build route, you can pretty much buy everything in one go with quite a bit of discount on it as well, buying the Armoured Clash Crown Faction Battle Group starter set. That one will come with the rulebook, the cards, the dice, the resin Landship, and a bit of terrain to boot to sort of sweeten the deal. And then a third way to start with the crown is to get the Battle for Singapore set. If you're the first player in a gaming community to start with any game, it's always sort of difficult to sort of find other players to convince to start the game along with you as well. And if you use this one, you will have an introductory force as well from the Chinese, from the Empire, and you sort of have an army that you can give away to an opponent to give the game a go along with you. Now, this slow grow expansion makes more sense if you look at this page from the Crown Orbat. This explains all the different points costs that you can get for your different units. And I'm going to use the Crown Infantry Rifle Platoon as an example. If you buy, for instance, the introductory set, you will get 6 of these bases of Crown Infantry Riflemen. These riflemen are basically the basic unit, which will clock in at 35 points for your force. However, you can bolster them providing you're playing a big enough battle to the medium size, or if you want to, you can add a third one to be a full strength unit, which means that you've got 18 bases of these little guys. However, that is only allowed if you're playing an apocalyptic battle, or if you choose to reinforce them in your force building step. And of course, their points cost depends on what level you take them. If you take them at the basic level, they're 35 points. The sweet spot seems to be around that reinforced point where you're only paying 30 points for a base. But if you're going full strength, it's still 90 points, so that's quite fine. It can be quite different. For instance, if you're taking the Royal Engineers Sappers, they are at their best point cost in the reinforced stage, but get a bit more expensive if you want to take them at full strength. And you will also notice that the big Landship, the Monarch Landship or the Sovereign Landship, is always considered to be a full strength unit. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can only field them when you're fighting apocalyptic battles though. The Orbat goes on to explain this in a bit more detail. The reinforcement levels are mentioned here, I've already explained those, but you can also opt to bolster a unit with, if there's a star symbol in the different army selection rules, and then you can go 1 reinforcement higher than normal for the chosen scale of battle. Your total force is made up of different battle groups, and there are 2 types of battle groups. There are the main faction battle group. Your force will need to include at least one of them, and for each one of those that you have, you can take one of the auxiliary battle groups to go along with them. However, these auxiliary battle groups will always need an extra commander unit for them to function, and a main battle group as well before you can take them. However, they do add a neat little commander bonus to them, giving you an extra spicy option and allowing you to tweak your playstyle. However, before we get into all of that, let's first have a look at the Crown Battle Group listing, and we're starting off with the Crown Faction Battle Group. Again, you will need this one no matter what army you make. The Crown Faction Battle Group actually has multiple options that you can take in them, but it also has a minimum, and those are expressed with the golden symbols within the Faction Battle Group. The first one is a commander. Every one of these battle groups is going to have to be led by a model. Now, there are only 3 commanders available to the Crown at this stage of the game. There's the Monarch and Sovereign Landships, those always count as full strength, but there's also the Rifle Platoon Commander, which is the basic platoon infantry, but it costs a bit more because it is a commander. Now remember when I said that the Landship always counts as being full strength? That doesn't mean that you can only field them in apocalyptic battles, because that commander has the option to be bolstered, meaning it can be taken at 1 higher reinforcement level than the battle size would normally allow, which means that you can take a resin Landship if you want to in a medium battle size. And a medium battle size is anywhere between 1,500 points and 2,500. And if you take pretty much every unit that you get in that one player faction starter set, you will roughly be around that 2,000 point marks, which means that you can field your big resin flagship, and you're sort of at that sweet spot of 2,000 points. Now, apart from that commander unit, you will also at least need 1 Crown Infantry unit. Now, it doesn't stipulate which infantry unit you take in this case. It can be anything, including the Scottish Sappers, the Crown Rifle Platoon, of course, but you can also take some sharp rifles as irregular troops to sort of fill in this slot. If we're taking a look at the unit entries that you can find in these Orbats, it will basically very boldly state in the left top corner what type of regiment it is, what type of unit it is, I should say, and what type of slot it will take up in that force organization. And in terms of infantry for this Crown Faction Battle Group, you can still take 3 additional infantry units, because it's 1 to 4 of them. So at least a minimum of 1, a maximum of 4, and of those 4, only 1 can be bolstered, meaning it's taken at 1 level higher than you're normally permitted, given the size of the battle. And if you look at all the different optional elements you have for these different unit types, you can pretty much fit your entire force that you've bought through the 1-player starter set in a Crown battle force. So that's pretty handy. You won't have to be locked out of some of the toys you get in your force, given all the options you can take here. Normally, you're only allowed to take 1 unit of each different unit type, with one exception. You can take mainstay units up to twice if you want to. So if you want to include 2 rifle platoons, which are very common troops within the Crown, you can do so in 1 battle force. And the same thing goes for the Galahad main battle tanks. These are your mainstay units, and you can take 2 of them rather than just the 1. But that doesn't mean you can just spam 4 different Galahad units because you're allowed 4 armor units. That's not quite how it works. And your battle group also confers a bonus to the units that are in there, and in this case it's a commander bonus called Lionhearted. Now that means that normally if you take casualties you have to take a suppression test, which means that you have to flip one of the Command and Conquest cards, and you have to hope that you pass your discipline test because you use your discipline stat. However, that's a bit of a luck of the gamble, because you don't know what your top card is from your deck. However, a Crown player is allowed to use a Command and Conquest card from their hand to pass that test, meaning that they can guarantee pass it if they don't get a bit too trigger happy with it and blow their entire hand through the suppression tests, of course. Now, being suppressed is quite the nasty thing in-game, because whenever a unit is suppressed it will automatically get a negative modifier on how good it can do an attack, but in addition it can only choose to do either a movement phase or an attack step, meaning that being suppressed is quite a good way, or suppressing an enemy is quite a good way to take a bit less firepower in return after you've done your activation. It'll be way harder to suppress the Crown thanks to this main rule. It is, however, a commander bonus, so make sure that you don't throw your commander into the thick of it where he's taking too much enemy firepower, because you will lose this bonus once your commander unit goes. And if you've taken one of the cheaper infantry units to have a quick, cheeky little command option, well, expect to also lose it quite fast. The other auxiliary battle groups are way smaller and way more specialized in what they do, but they do offer a new way to play with the faction that you do not have and makes them quite unique. And the Linebreaker auxiliary battle group is pretty much what achieves this for the Crown. You will need to take a Crown commander unit, obviously can be bolstered, so you can have your big landships as one of these if you want, and you will need a mandatory Crown armor or cavalry unit that can also be bolstered. In addition, if you want to give them some infantry support, you can do so, but that is completely optional. The mainstay units for these are of course the rifle platoon, as we've seen before. The Galahad main battle tanks can be taken twice as well, should you so desire, but you can also take Glamis mobile guns as crown armor twice instead of just once in this force. Now, the main benefit for taking this battle force is the commander bonus, the Linebreakers, which is a special command. This battle group's general can issue a special command to a crown unit, an armor unit, at the end phase, which is normally when you check to see if you can gain control of an objective. Now, normally only infantry and cavalry units are able to contest objectives. However, if this command is successful, you can actually use an armor unit to do so, which is quite a strong option. And to issue this command, you have to play a card from your hand, one of your Command and Conquest cards. However, you do not use the actual command that is on the card, you just use the value of the command that is being issued. Your opponent then has a chance to interfere. He doesn't know the value of the card that you're throwing out, so he has to decide whether or not he wants to throw a high value card as an interference or not, and that's quite a strong option, because he might not want to do that, and if he doesn't, he just loses control of the strategic objective. So if your opponent was just hanging on to that one little card to make sure that he can steal the initiative on the next round, you can actually get to him with this special command, which is quite a good option. Mind you, it is a command, so you cannot issue it to any tanks that suffered a disorder level, so make sure that you do not place those officers in too awkward a position if you're taking this Linebreaker regiment. The second auxiliary battle group that you can take with the Crown is one that is more focused around field guns and artillery. You will of course still need a commander for this unit, which can be bolstered, but you can then take 1 to 3 Crown field guns or artillery units, which can be bolstered as well should you so desire. You can have up to 3 of these field guns and artillery units, and if you want some infantry support, you can add 2 Crown infantry or cavalry units and up to 4 armoured units as options. The mainstay units are the moderate heavy artillery, which is their anti-tank artillery, the Boers heavy bombards, which is more sort of their heavy anti-infantry guns, or you can take the Drake field guns, which do not particularly shoot very hard, but are very flexible and can shoot just as well at infantry as they do at armor units. The main issue with these different artilleries and field guns is that they all have the cumbersome rule, which you can overcome by issuing a special command, again by playing a card from your hand, to sort of ignore that rule during the step of that activation. The cumbersome rule can be found at the back of the Orbat, which is mentioned here. If this unit makes a double time maneuver, it gains the reloading status, so you normally can't move very quickly with your artillery, but if you're taking this battle group, yeah, you can move and sort of catch your opponent off guard with this one. Personally, I think this command is not the strongest of the 3 that I've read so far. I think the big deal is that you can take a lot of artillery, and artillery is quite potent in this game because it provides some absolutely scary firepower over a long distance. So if you're sort of the commander who wants to sit back and shoot stuff from afar, well, that's definitely a playstyle that the Crown can accommodate. That's it for how you build an army though. If you have any questions, make sure that you sound off in the comments. I'll try to answer them as quickly as possible. And if you want to see a similar video coming up for the Empire, for the Chinese faction, make sure that you subscribe to the channel for when that video drops. And of course, if you want to do all the YouTube-y things such as liking and sharing the video, that greatly helps the channel as well. Now, onto the different units that you can take in a Crown force. And we're starting things off with the different command units that you can get, and we're starting off with the most simple one being the Rifle Command Platoon. Now, the Rifle Command Platoon comes with 6 bases, but it can be reinforced at 12 or it can be taken at full strength at 18. However, this is a ridiculously expensive unit because it has the command trait for what it actually does on the battlefield. So I think this unit is best taken as a cheeky little basic unit that doesn't cost you too many points, but that does kind of unlock one of those different battle groups. However, given how vulnerable they are to incoming firepower, I would not throw them in the thick of it. They only have defense 2, which means 2 hits is enough to cause a point of damage, and they have a damage limit of 1, so 1 base out of 6 is taken off every time those 2 hits are scored, which means that they can die in droves if you just leave them wide out in the open. Luckily, the Crown has access to some cheap transport units or some more expensive ones, and that means that you can easily take the cheap transport option to sort of offer a bit of protection for your commander unit without sort of exposing him to a bunch of long-range artillery too much. Because other than that cheeky little command trait, there's not much to them. They move 4 inch, their defense and damage limit was already discussed. They do have excellent discipline though, and the break limit is 2, meaning that if they fail a suppression test, once there's only 2 bases left, they're just gonna get out of there anyway. They do have chain of command 6 inch, which means that they have a 6 inch bubble around them, where other units are going to get +1 discipline for their own suppression tests, so that is a quite strong little bonus, and that puts them at discipline 9 themselves as well, which is quite high, especially if you combine it with stoic defense. Stoic defense also provides a bit of extra protection when you're getting charged at. If you are being charged and you have this rule, you get a defensive advantage, which basically gives them the ability to strike first before your opponent gets to do his melee attacks. Defensive advantages are normally tied to charging through difficult terrain, which is never a clever idea to do if you're the commander, but yeah, these rifle platoons, also the regular version, get this stoic defense advantage regardless whether your opponent is charging through difficult terrain or not. And if you look at the attack potential of this unit with their ranged light weapons, they have a range of up to 14 inch, which is decent for infantry. They chuck 5 dice if they're 1 to 6 models, they'll chuck 12 dice if they're 7 to 12, and if they are full strength, meaning 13 to 18, they will throw a massive 18 dice. But again, I wouldn't take him with that larger unit size, because then this unit is extremely expensive for the benefit of that chain of command. They have a ranged attack against aerial units, but that might as well not be there, because that really is taking a potshot, and they are completely impotent when they have to face armor, which is also something that you definitely have to take into account when you're deploying this unit. If you're putting this unit up in front of a bunch of enemy infantry, armored units, you have made a cock-up of biblical proportions. The other option that you can take that sort of becomes unlocked once you start playing battles, meaning 1500 plus points, is the Monarch Landship. It's only of course a 1 model, and it is worth a colossal 8 victory points to your opponent if they manage to destroy it. It is of course a heavy target, an armored target, which means that your opponent is going to have to use their heavy attacks against them, which in and of itself already provides a bit of extra protection, and couple that with a defense of 5, meaning your opponent needs to score 5 hits before they actually can apply a point of damage, and then a damage limit of 12, these things aren't going to go down anytime soon, unless of course you really put them in a vulnerable position against your opponent's armor. They only have discipline 7, which isn't the biggest of deals because, well, they basically have to take a suppression test once they lose a model, and it's only a single model, so who cares really about the discipline. They do offer a chain of command bonus of 12 inch this time around, which means that they offer quite a heavy discipline bubble compared to the normal infantry regiment that we just saw. Now in terms of attack, this one has 4 different profiles. The first one is a light attack at range with only 20 inch range with 3, 6 and 9 attacks. That depends on how much damage this unit has taken. If it has not taken much damage, meaning 0 to 4 points of damage, it is using the right column, and as it starts taking more damage, 5 to 9, it has to use the medium one, and if it's near destruction or near destroyed, it's only going to use the left column in this road, which means that you can have a fair bit of damage from your turret weapons that are mounted on it. And the turret rule basically allows it to fire or make target acquisition in other arcs than its front arc. So you can do it in any of the side arcs or even the rear arcs if you want to. However, that also comes with a negative combat modifier. So if you're having to shoot to the left or the right or the back, expect to be shooting slightly less efficiently. The other ranged light attack comes with a lot more range, 30 as the point blank range, which means that you get a bonus to your combat rating, by the way, in case you didn't know, and 60 inch for its normal rating with a colossal 17 dice, which can also shoot indirectly, meaning you do not have to be too worried about intervening buildings and everything. It does have a minimum range of 10 inch, so there's no point blanking too heavily with it. The biggest disadvantage though comes with the reload word. That reload word is tied in with slow to fire. You're not allowed to shoot this weapon if you've got the reloading status, and the slow to fire rule says that you cannot shoot this weapon at... The reload word means that it cannot be fired if your unit has the reloading status, and unfortunately the other rule, slow to fire, means that every time you use this attack you will be gaining the reloading status. It also means that you're not allowed to shoot this weapon during opportunity fire, because, well, this unit can make 3 different actions thanks to the all-out attack 3 rule that it has as a special rule. And special actions count as pretty much an attack, so you can go on lookout, for instance. You can also rearm, but you're not allowed to rearm in the same turn that you've gained your reloading status, however. Which means that its most devastating attack is only happening once every other turn, in other words. It also has the Siege Breaker attack rule, which means that if you're firing at occupied buildings or units occupying this building, there is a 1 in 2 chance that the building will just be completely demolished and no longer be garrisonable by any units that were in there either. So quite strong if your opponent is in a very defensed position, but don't expect this massive attack to happen every single turn. Luckily though, it doesn't end with these attacks. There's also the option to do a heavy ranged attack with a range of 10 and 20 inch with the devastating rules, meaning if you have any excess hits that do not cause any damage during the attack, normally they're discarded, but thanks to devastating, you will still be causing an additional point of damage to the opponent. And if I read that rule correctly, that means that if you're having to throw 4 dice if your model is near destroyed, it'll most likely still be doing a point of damage to an armor unit, because you don't even have to roll the threshold, which can be quite a bit of a last bit of venom in the tail of this tank's existence. And if you're going to be able to charge with this vehicle, you're throwing a massive 12 dice in the assault if this one is at full health, so that is still a 3rd type of attack that you can do. Mind you, if you're doing an all-out attack, it does mean that you first have to do the impact hits if you're doing a charge maneuver, and then proceed to fire with any of the lighter weapons that you have remaining. And the tank also comes with ponderous movement and is large, and with only speed 6, this thing is really sort of a slow thing to move along the battlefield, because you're not doubling your movement range, or you're only just sort of stuck to that 6 inch even when you're making charge ranges, so this thing isn't speeding across the board anytime soon. And if it does get destroyed, it does have the spectacular demise rule of 8, which means that there's about a well, 2 in 6 chance, or 1 in 3, that you're going to have a detonation when it is destroyed, which means that you do an attack with 8 dice to any units within 4 inch of it when it does go down. And if you're really unlucky, it gets a cataclysmic detonation, which means those 8 attack dice are being thrown against every unit within 8 inches. So yeah, your opponent is going to have a big payoff if he manages to destroy this one, and there's a bunch of troops cluttered around it. If you want to take the Landship that doesn't have the big once every other turn artillery piece on there though, you can take the Sovereign Landship instead. In terms of defenses and speed, it is incredibly similar. 6 inches move, defense 5, damage limit 12 and discipline 7, with the same chain of command of 12, although it does have the Inspiring keyword. And thanks to Inspiring, if this unit has finished its activation, it can select up to, in this case, 3 units within 12 inch of it and just make them lose that suppressed status straight away. So in that way it does function even more as a command ship. And it doesn't just function more as a command ship though, it also functions as a troop transporter, because this one is a transport ship which can take up to 12 bases along with it, which means that you can take things like a full strength sapper unit from the Scots in there, which is pretty darn good. I wouldn't be putting another command unit in there and yo-dogging it that way. And because it's not carrying as much ammo as the Monarch counterpart, this one only has Spectacular Demise 6, which means that it's going to be less devastating if this one blows up, but still pretty horrible, so make sure that that doesn't happen. In terms of its attack profile, it's very similar to the Monarch, except that the Sovereign has an extra dice with its turret options, which is pretty neat, I suppose. It can chuck up to 10 dice with a turret attack, meaning you can shoot in all directions. It's pretty nifty. In terms of the ranged attack, you're still dealing with that 13 dice with a degrading profile, of course, with the devastating keyword to do a bit of extra damage to any unfortunate tanks in front of it. And you mustn't forget, if you're taking this Sovereign Landship and you're using it as the transport ship, that you're getting a double activation, because those units will be coordinated, giving you access to some serious Alpha Strike capabilities, so losing the big guns is definitely not the end of the world. That's probably why they are quite similar in points cost. Now, onto the regular infantry in the Crown, and of course the staple unit, the mainstay unit, is the Rifle Platoon. There's 6 models in a basic unit, which is reinforced to 12 and becomes 18 in full strength, and they do not give away too many victory points at 2, 3 and 4, and are actually quite cheap in terms of points costs as well. A fully bolstered unit is only clocking at 90 points, which is dirt cheap for the attack power that you're getting from it. However, the awkward thing will be the large size of the unit, which means that you will not be able to transport it that easily. You would need another bolstered unit of other transport units before you can actually move these guys around, which is pretty tricky to do in your list building phase. So I expect at 60 points the reinforced unit is going to be a lot more common, and I can easily see taking 2 units of these, because with their range of 14 inch and their defensive capabilities, they're going to be able to sort of hold the line for you, but do not expect them to take a lot of punishment. That's not really their strong suit. Luckily though, they are only size 1, so screening them shouldn't be too difficult, and seeing how the Crown has easy access to transport capability with the Tristan assault transports, you might be able to screen them from the worst of enemy firepower and sort of have them shooting in a different way. They also do not come with any heavy ranged attack options at all, so the same thing goes for when I was discussing the command version of this platoon. Do not throw them against tanks, because they will just die horribly, as they can do nothing but sit on an objective. Mind you, they still have the Stoic Defense rule, which gives them the defensive advantage, meaning they can strike first if they're being charged. But with only 6 dice at the medium size, which I think will be the most popular one, do not expect to do too much to the enemy either. Still though, at 14-inch range and 12 attacks for a normal unit, they are able to chew through enemy infantry rather quickly, so if there are any cheeky objectives that you can grab that way, these are pretty good at it, and they're also protected against most cavalry charges a bit through stoic defense, especially if you can get multiples of these units lined up as well to sort of have a kill zone this way. The other option is to send in the Scots. These are a bit more expensive at the basic unit level. They are 45, which is 10 points more than the rifle platoon, and they're 15 points more, so in comparison, not that much worth. Meaning that there's 75 points at the reinforced level, and if you want to go for a full reinforced unit, a full strength unit, you're paying 115 points, but again, I think that is a pretty good match with the Sovereign Landship. The thing that sets it apart though, this unit, is the Occupy and Storming Party keywords that are on there. Occupy means that you can even take over enemy behemoths that have been destroyed, so if you're destroying your opponent's landships, you can actually cheekily occupy them if you want to. And Storming Party makes them able to use the garrison action in the movement step as if it were a maneuver. Normally, occupying a building or garrisoning a building takes up the entire attack step, so them being able to do this in the movement phase is quite nifty. In addition, they are also able to take over a building without their opponent benefiting from the defensive advantage capabilities. So if you have opponents that are dug in buildings and you want to shift them out, these are the guys who will do it. In addition, they also do one thing really well. That other thing being wrecking tanks. Their melee attacks have the wrecker keyword, which means that you use the second value in parentheses if you're attacking something with the heavy target. So if a bunch of tanks get charged by these sappers, they have different satchels and grenades and whatnot, they're in big trouble, especially if that big unit then throws 16 dice. That's enough to take down any tanks in the game, or at least chew up that unit quite fast. And while their main attack, the ranged attack, isn't quite as good as the rifleman counterpart from the British, that does mean that they have a way more specialized job to do when they're on the battlefield. I think these are excellent to take with both the Tristan, because the assault ramp can mean that they can do some pretty nifty things, more on that later, and they can also combine very well with the Sovereign, because then you can take that full-sized unit. The third fun infantry regiment that they have are the Sharp Rifles. These come in units of 4, 8 and 12 bases. They do score a bit more victory points, 3, 4 and 5. They have a bit more speed, at speed 5. The defense value is still 2 with a damage limit of 1, and their discipline is 8 with a break limit of 1, meaning that they're only bolt if there's a single base left for them. Their big advantage though is the ranged attack against light targets, only shooting at a colossal 32 inches with the precision keyword. Now, precision basically makes the unit that you're shooting at disordered as soon as you cause a casualty, because if you're shooting at an open formation, you, as the attacker, get to pick which model is destroyed. Normally, you have to pick the target which is closest to the enemy, your opponent, well, the enemy shooting of course. That usually isn't the officer model, because, well, that would just automatically make the unit disordered, so you get a bit more control in it that way. And if you're shooting at something in closed formation, you're automatically conferring the disordered status, because you might as well have shot the officer, the field promotion would have made the new model in the front, the new officer, etc., but rather than mucking about with removing models, you just gain the disorder status. So it's quite a bit of a stronger attack compared to regular riflemen, but you do pay for that, because these are 50 points at basic level, 85 points at the reinforced, and a colossal 130 points if you take the full strength unit. And whilst this unit definitely can take objectives, they're perhaps not the most suited to just be sent out in the wide open because they are irregular units. It means you can use them in open formations instead of closed. They are always shrouded. They get to make a double move before the game starts because they have the Vanguard keyword. And they have Pioneers, so they don't have to treat difficult terrain with a movement penalty. They can just move across it as if it were open terrain. That means that they can definitely move towards an objective, but if you do that too soon, they're just going to get chewed up by the enemy. It's best to sort of hang back and shoot at your opponent, and then if it's required of them in late game, I would be moving them up towards the enemy. They can easily move a double time behind a building and then start garrisoning it as well for some increased defense, but that does mean that your first turn is probably not going to spend shooting, and well, those long rifles really are going to want to be fired from turn 1. Now the final option for infantry, if you want to take an objective really quick, are the Spitfire Rocketeers. These guys come in bases of 4, 8 and 12, and they reward 3, 4 and 5 victory points to your opponent. They're only size 1 because they're light targets, they're infantry of course, and they move at a speed of 4, but that's pretty irrelevant because they have this soar 10-inch rule. Soar means that if this unit activates, it can actually choose to do a soar maneuver during the movement step, and if it does so, the speed will become 10 inches in this case. Its target category becomes aerial, which means you do have to be careful for an opponent taking any potshots at you if they're on lookout with aerial weapons. But while it is moving, it can treat all terrain and enemy units as open terrain and just basically fly over them. However, you cannot end your move in impassable or blocking terrain. They are only defense 2 and damage limit 1, so if your opponent is able to take them out with flak fire, that would be very painful. Their discipline will probably mean that they do not break or get shocked by it rather quickly, but with their break limit of 1, they can still hang around, but the unit will dwindle down rather quickly. Versatile means that they can basically switch their activation around. They can do the attack step first, then a reaction step for your opponent if he's using any on lookout fire, then the movement, and then a final reaction step as well for your opponent. Combine that with the fact that they are irregular, so they can fight in open formation. They can move about the board in a very fun little way. They are bulky though, so don't expect them to transport them in any of your armored transport options. Now these guys are pretty useless if they have to go up against armor. They only realistically have their melee attacks with 4, 6 and 8 dice, and the shock keyword allows them to use the parentheses if they're attacking light targets, so you don't really get any bonus for attacking enemy armor, but they will shred through infantry in an assault like nothing else. And even if you do not quite make it into combat range with the enemy, you can still use your ranged light attack as well, which is only 3 and 6 inches, 3 being point blank, and if you manage to get into point blank range, they really are chucking out a lot of dice as well, with 6, 12 and 15. If you're having to shoot at 6 inch though, there are still no slouches at 4, 8 and 10 dice. Definitely a fun little glass cannon unit in your crown force, and if there's a lot of terrain on the table, definitely a unit that's going to shine, but perhaps is going to be a bit too vulnerable for its points cost if you're just wide out in the open. Now on to the Cavalry, and I'm starting out with the Blackwatch Heavy Dragoons. The reason why is that these are the models that they recommend you build if you make the Battle for Singapore set, even though this unit is more suited towards shooting at aerial units compared to the Assault Dragoons. These models are still light models, meaning they are treated as infantry when they are being fired at. However, they are size 2, so you can't just hide them behind your regular infantry should you so desire, and they come with 4, 8 and 12 models in a unit and reward 3, 4 and 5 victory points for your opponent. They're a bit faster, of course, at speed 6. They only still have defense 2, so they're not that much more tough compared to regular infantry units, but they do have a damage limit of 2, upping the amount of damage your opponent is going to have to do to them by 2, basically. And luckily, if you're taking the ones with shields, they are always shrouded, which means they always, your opponent will always have the concealed penalty against him when he's trying to fire at you. They are slightly trickier, however, to get behind terrain that is big enough for them to get the concealed bonus and to increase their defense that way. And unfortunately, a bit atypical for the Crown, their discipline is at 6, so don't expect them to just wade into firepower of the enemy and ignore everything altogether. However, if you're having to take some objectives really fast with a unit that can fire at a decent rate, these are the boys for you. They are incredibly flexible, I should say, with their firepower profile. They have 22-inch range and only need 14 to be in point blank to get a bonus, and you can make either a ranged attack or heavy attack that isn't that very different. The ranged attack, oddly enough, is only 3 dice when you're shooting at light targets 7 and 11, and then something weird happens with the heavy dice where it's actually more efficient if there's not that many of them, but it becomes less efficient as more and more of their pals join into the fight. And should your opponent have any aircraft, which will not be the case at first, but if he's also doing weird things with flying jump pack troops, such as, for instance, the Chinese flyers, you can get a pretty nasty bite with the ranged aerial unit as well, because you can put them on lookout if they have nothing to fire at, and then still chuck up to 13 dice at any aircraft units. So yeah, they're offering protection against those annoying jump pack troops from your opponent with SOAR as well. The Blackwatch Assault Dragoons are the more aggressive option that I probably would recommend if you do not use the Battle for Singapore introductory rule set though, especially because aircraft aren't really a thing yet in the game. Similar stats in terms of defense, size and everything, but the one difference is that they trade the Shrouded rule, meaning that they were always concealed, for Pioneers, and that allows them to move through difficult terrain as if it were open terrain. In terms of the attacks though, they use the option to shoot at aircraft altogether, but their melee attack is greatly improved. With 6, 8 and 14 dice with Devastating, they can get up close and do some damage with those big chainsaws. And in terms of firepower towards the opponent, their 7 and 18 range stats, they have way shorter range compared to their normal Dragoon counterparts, but they do get that neat point blank attack, which makes them chew up infantry really fast. And their potential against armor is also increased with their weapons. If you're taking the bigger units, it's slightly worse if it's just a minimum squadron, the basic squadron, but it is increased as you go into the reinforced or even full-sized units as well. But yeah, they have the same point cost as their regular counterparts, so you're really just making a choice between a more aggressive in-your-face style units with the Blackwatch Assault Dragoons, and if you want more of a point guard that takes a point and then defends it, even against aircraft, you're taking the regular Dragoons. And if you want to play ultra aggressively, the Horse Guard Cavalry is also an option. They come on 5, 10 and 15 bases with VPR of 3, 4 and 5 and only are size 1, so they'll be a bit more easy to hide behind buildings and even other friendly units. They're also slightly cheaper compared to the Dragoons. They do only have damage limit 1, so they're able to take a bunch less damage compared to them, but they are at speed 8, which makes them quite fast. The break limit is 2, so if only 2 bases remain and you lose a discipline test, you're out, and the discipline is 7, so it's slightly better than the Dragoons, but not by much. The big downside though is that they only have a single attack stat, which is a melee stat. Now the melee stat is nothing to sneeze at though. With 6, 8 and 14 they can threaten both light armor and heavy armor, but if you're choosing to charge light infantry models, you're chucking 9, 12 and 21 dice because this has the shock keyword, so it's very easy to run down enemy infantry. They do that extremely well, and mind you, they're cavalry. At a pinch you can still use them to stand on an objective if that is what is required to win the game for you. The next category is only a single entry really, the field guns, which are the Drake field guns. These cannot contest objectives because they're neither infantry or cavalry, but they can shoot at the opponent reasonably well. In terms of models for the points, it's 4, 8 and 12. At size 1 they can hide behind most things, including your own models. That means that you have to be careful as well though, that's a thing that cuts both ways. And they're not worth that many victory points for your opponent, only 2, 3 and 4. With defense 2 and damage limit 1 however, they are incredibly vulnerable and their discipline is only at 5, which is borderline abysmal for this faction. The unit itself counts as static, which means you cannot do charge maneuvers with them. Well, with 2, 3 and 4 attacks that was a bad idea to begin with. If you lose a close quarter combat, you're just annihilated straight away. There's no coming back from it, so very vulnerable in melee as well. They also have the cumbersome keyword, meaning that if you double time with this unit, you're getting the reload status, which means you will not be able to fire in the next turn either. There is a small thingy that's wrong with the rules right now. If you make a double time maneuver, just to be clear, you're not shooting that turn with your units. That used to be in the beta rule set that we proofread, but it was removed from the rulebook for sort of layout reasons, but it's going to be back, it's going to be errata soon. You can of course ignore this cumbersome rule if you're taking the field artillery battle force, but yeah, that's still, like I said, it wasn't the most impressive bonus for this reason. In terms of damage output though, they have decent stats. 30-inch range is very decent, especially since most of these tanks do not have massive range, as we'll soon find out. With a point blank range of 16-inch, with 3, 6 and 9 dice with a reload status. That's not the best shooting in the world, however, there's not much difference between shooting between heavy targets and light targets. There's a bit of a difference in dice of course, but these guys can join in at the anti-tank shooting at a pinch. If you're shooting at ranged light targets, that's 10 and 24 dice, so definitely a different ammo type that you're using. With a point blank stat, so if your enemy infantry wanders in within 10 inch, they're getting grape shot and they really are going to take a lot of damage at 8, 12 and 16 dice. However, if they're not, if they're just at a reasonable 24 inch, you're still taking 4, 8 and 12 dice, so take the Drake field guns to largely shoot at infantry formations, but at a pinch they can add to the tank firepower. That's pretty much my main takeaway from them. However, at 70, 120 and 180 points for the unit, that is a heavy points cost to be paying for generalist units, generalist artillery I should say. And purely for segue reasons, I'm skipping the armoured category for now and then going into the dedicated artillery as well. We start off with the Boers Heavy Bombards, which are size 2 and are heavy targets, meaning that they will be protected against any infantry trying to shoot at them because they generally only have light attacks. They come in pairs of 2 or 4 and 6 if you start reinforcing them. However, they are worth quite a bit of victory points for your opponent if he does manage to destroy them. Their speed is a ridiculously slow 3 inch, and they are static, so there's no double timing with them and you can't charge with them. No wait, you can double time with them, but if you do, you gain the reloading status thanks to the cumbersome rule, and then you're not firing at all, which is a really bad idea to just move an additional 3 inches. They do, however, have the resilient front keyword, which means their defense is normally a paltry 2, but it becomes 3 if your opponent is shooting at them from the front. At 100 points for a basic regiment and then 170 and 260, their damage limit is really low for the points cost, so try to ensure that your opponent's tanks do not get close enough to them to start damaging them. Their discipline is also only 6, so they will not enjoy getting fired at. However, your opponent will hopefully have to make a bit of an effort to get close to them, because with 48 inch firepower along with the indirect keyword, they should be able to pummel your opponent with firepower. Indirect, by the way, means that you can fire at pretty much any unit that another one of your units has line of sight to, so there's almost no hiding from this amount of firepower. However, it is way more specialized than what we've seen with the Drake guns. They do have a ranged heavy profile, but that is only 3, 5 and 7 dice with a minimum range of 8, indirect and reload. You're getting desperate if you're using that attack value, or you've already annihilated all the infantry that your opponent has, in which case, yay! The other piece of more specialized artillery is the Mordred Heavy Artillery. This version is the complete opposite of the Boers Bombard. This one shoots really well at heavy targets, but if you're using it to shoot at light target, something has either gone spectacularly wrong or it's going really well for you. Very similar in defensive stats and other stats compared to the Boers, except for the fact that this one is slightly more expensive at 110 points. It moves absolutely at a crawling pace at 3 inch, can't do any charges, and doesn't really get to fire anymore if you've made a double time maneuver with it, so please don't. It also has a resilient front, which helps a touch with the defense value of 3 if your opponent is shooting at it from the front. With damage limit 2, these things are extremely vulnerable. The light profile is at 20 and 45 inch, so 45 inch and 24 point blank with 4, 6 and 8, a minimum range of 4 inch and reload. That's really not going to put a dent in a pack of butter. That's really weak attack and a poor return on investment. However, if you're shooting at heavy targets with 7, 12 and 17 with a devastating keyword, also a minimum range 4 and reload, you're going to put a lot of hurt on tanks, and that's even enough to crack heavy tanks in the game, such as for instance Galahads or the opposing Landships. Mind you, the Mordred Heavy Artillery doesn't come with the indirect keyword, so you're going to have to find a good elevated position for them to shoot at, hopefully far enough away from the opponent so you don't have to suffer too much from incoming firepower. Mind you, with 45 inch range and the fact that they are heavy attacks, that does mean that your opponent isn't going to have a very likely shot at these types of units, but you are sort of reliant on finding a good position with a good, killing field in front of them if you're deploying them. And then finally, the last category that we're talking about are the armor. And the first is the Galahad Breachers. Now the Galahad Breachers are the ones that have these sort of flamer turrets almost to the side of them, so they are the alternate build of the Galahad main battle tank. Now in terms of stats, they are incredibly similar. They come in pairs of 2, and you can be reinforcing them to 4 or going full mode at 6. VPR are 4, 5 and 6, so they do award quite a bit of points for your opponent. They're size 2 and count as tanks, of course, when you're shooting at them, so only heavy shots are going to do any damage to them. With speed 6 and defense 3, they can take quite a bit of a beating, especially because they have that resilient front, meaning that they quickly become defense 4 when you're shooting at them. Their damage limit 4 as well, so it takes a bit of punishment before it goes down. Discipline is only 6. If one of them gets damaged, though, the other one might be in a bit of a shock. In other words, these things are super hard to take down. However, they also cost a very meaty 160 points for 2 of them, and well, if you get 4 of them rather, that's 270 points, so you're getting a big discount, because that would be 320 otherwise. If you're going for the full unit, you are paying a bit more, that's 415 points, but yeah, that's something that you don't want to come that you don't want to see coming your way if you're the opponent. These guys come with 3 different profiles. Remember, you're only choosing one to fire at. These do not have the sort of Landship rule that they can do multiple attack actions. Those actions are a ranged attack at 30 inch, which is decent, but doesn't really come with a lot of dice. 3, 6 and 9 is nothing really to write home about. If, however, you're using them with a much shorter range, 4 inch and 8 inch, they get the same number of dice though, but they get the Siege Breaker and Sponsons rule. Siege Breaker we already briefly touched upon. That means that if you're attacking a unit which is garrisoning a defensible building, you have a 1 in 2 chance, if you roll a strike or heroic strike, to wreck the building, meaning that they can no longer be occupied. and that the opposing unit has to come out. So these are great for flushing out enemies from buildings. One rule that counteracts this though is the occupy special rule. They can stay in it, and that building is then just treated as blocking terrain for the rest of the game if it's being demolished by one of these side sponsons. The sponsons rule, by the way, also allows this attack profile to be used if an enemy charged at you. So if you're being charged by something like cavalry, for instance, you can use this attack, provided the cavalry is a light target, to make a response attack even if this one isn't on lookout. However, that doesn't allow you to just keep doing that indefinitely. It's once in a turn and that's it. The real power in the Galahad Breacher, and the main battle tank for that matter, is its heavy attack. It's not super long range at only 20 inch, but with 6, 10 and 14 dice that can really put a lot of hurt on opposing armor. And yeah, you're supposed to sort of fight armor with these tanks and can do a spot of damage against enemy infantry. The Galahad main battle tank makes an attack with has a very similar defensive profile compared to the Breacher that we've discussed, so I'm not going to go over all of it, but the weird thing about it is it has the same sort of attack as the Breacher has, with the sponsons rule on top of it, so 12, 13, which are the machine guns on the side, with 3, 6 and 9 dice. That does make me wonder if the Breacher doesn't just accidentally still have a line too many in there. But yeah, this one can use the turrets to do a light attack, but doesn't get the siege breaker rules with the very short range to it. It does, however, come with the same resilient front, and it is still largely used for the heavy attack in here. It can do a bit of impact damage as well if it charges, but it is nothing stellar. But yeah, in terms of its defense being 4 in the front and then damage limit 4, that means you have to do a colossal 16 hits on this tank before you actually start destroying one if you're shooting it from the front. And very durable vehicles is going to be, a bit of a pillar in terms of the Crown playstyle altogether. So the Galahad main battle tank really sort of exemplifies this, emphasizes this. They don't just have heavy tanks though, there's also this one, the Glamis mobile guns. These are 2, 4 and 6. They don't award as many victory points because it's only 2, 3 and 4 to your opponent if they destroy them. It is a heavy target though at size 2. They're slightly faster at speed 2, but only comes with defense 2. However, that's to be taken with a grain of salt because they also have that resilient front and their damage limit is only 3 as well. Mind you, when it comes to their points cost only being 75 points for a basic unit, that means that you can probably get a lot more armor wounds on the table if you're taking Glamis mobile guns. However, because of the way the reinforcement system works, it's not like you can just willy-nilly create massive packs of these guys. The medium unit, the 4 unit, clocks in at 130 points, which is still cheaper than a Galahad main battle tank, and if you're honest, if you're looking at the attack stat for this one with 5 dice, it's not that much worse even, given the fact that it has a hefty 30-inch range as well. So a medium unit of these Glamis mobile guns is probably going to be almost as annoying to take down as Galahad main battle tanks, and they do not really suffer that big of a big disadvantage, I should say, compared to Galahad's, because that's only 1 dice fewer, and well, it's also a bit cheaper, so this is a very strong entry in my book. The only downside is that 5 dice is probably going to be enough to do a bit of damage to most medium tanks, but it is unlikely to put some damage on something like a big Landship, so do take that into account. It's nice, but it stops somewhere. And the heavy attacks aren't really its main strength. You're better off firing at light targets with the Glamis mobile gun. It only has 24-inch range, but you do get a significantly better amount of dice with 4, 8 and 12. But yeah, that's sort of it for your main shooting platforms, but one thing that does set the Crown apart from other factions is that they have access to some good transports, and one of those is the Tristan Assault Transports. This one is based on the hull of the main Galahad tank. It is size 2, heavy target obviously, comes in packs of 2, 4 and 6, does award 3, 4 and 5 victory points to your opponent, but it does have that same speed 6, defense 3, damage limit 4. Does not have the resilient front though, so it is a bit more vulnerable compared to the Galahad main battle tank. However, the points cost is also significantly less, with only 65 points paid for 2 of these. Now in terms of attack, they only have the side sponsons, sort of the flamer side sponsons, as found on the breacher tanks, so 3, 6 and 9 dice against light targets, but it comes with the siege breaker rules and the sponsons, so you can very easily and cheekily screen units off with these units, and then also protect them for assaults if you can use those sponson rules if your opponent does try to charge them. So I consider them quite strong for supporting units as well. And with a transport capacity of 4 for each of these, you can have 2 of these Tristan assault transports to basically transport a unit of 8 of the Scottish guys, the wreckers. That's quite a good combo in my book. But by far the rule that sets them apart is the assault ramp that comes on them. That means that they can just forego any shooting attack and make a special attack action that allows the unit that is inside of them to pop out and make an exit maneuver. Remember, if you're using this as a transport unit, you're going to be coordinated with the unit that is inside, and that basically frees up the unit in its entirety to still make a move or charge action and do its attack as well. That means that if you, for instance, take 2 of these and then have 8 bases of Royal Engineer Sappers in them, this unit can move 3 inch ahead. The unit that is inside can deploy 3 inches within this unit's range, which means that, well, if you put your Scotsmen in, for instance, 2 ranks, you can have them up to 5 inch from the front of this tank, no problem, and those Scots can then immediately make a charge action of 10 inches as well, making it quite a long range that you can have. And if they charge enemy tanks, those wreckers are going to, well, wreck things. And you know, at 65 points for a pair of Tristan assault transports, and then 75 points, if my memory serves me correct, for the Royal Engineer Sappers, that means you're paying 140 points for something that is possibly doing just as much damage at a comparable range to the Galahad breacher or main battle tank, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. The Sovereign Battle Box is going to be released soon, and, well, the Landship is eating up the turrets that are used by Galahad main battle tanks, but you could do a lot worse than having to build this Tristan assault transport as a sort of an alternative. And the cheapest bit of armor that can be fielded by the Crown, finally, are these things, the Sterling Armoured Transports. They come in pairs and can be upgraded to be 4 or 6 models. They are size 2 and are of course tanks as well, so heavy targets, and they award next to no victory points for your opponent, 1, 2 and 3. These are quite zippy. They come with 7 inch speed. They have a defense value of 2, but luckily their resilient front is going to bump that up to 3 if you're shooting at them from the front, and with damage limit 3 they can take a bit of punishment before they go down. The discipline is on the low end of the scale for a Crown faction though, at only 5, but it's not that bad if this unit ends up being suppressed. You're not taking it for its firepower. Speaking of firepower, they have a ranged attack only against light targets with 20 inch range and 12 in point blank range. That clocks in at 3 dice, 5 dice and 7 dice, so definitely nothing to write home about. In terms of impact though, 3, 6 and 9, that's the same as any of the tanks in the Crown basically, and you know, you might just do that at a pitch if you're facing opposing forces as well, because if they have deployed their payload, well, what else are you going to do with them? These, however, do not have those famed assault ramps, and therefore they pair way better, I think, with the classic rifle platoon, because a reinforced, a medium-sized rifle platoon is only 60 points, and then if you take a reinforced unit of the Sterling armored transport, you're paying 70 points for it. So the package deal comes in at 170 points, which is quite reasonable for a unit that is made to just go and take the center without necessarily having to charge at the opponent to do some damage like the Scots were. These guys have a carry capacity of 3, meaning that if you get 2 of them you can transport 6 bases, which is just perfectly matched to the rifle platoon to begin with, so that's why these guys are a match made in heaven, just like the Tristan was a match made in heaven with a reinforced unit of Royal Engineer Sappers. And then the very final section of the Orbat explains the different boons. This section can be found right after all of the special rules, but, well, basically going all over the units, we have talked about every one of those special rules, so I'm not doing it again here. The boons are, you can only take 1 per force, but they are the perfect way to sort of fill in those last few points gaps that you might have, and some of them can form some really strong combinations with other units found in the Orbat. For instance, for only 15 points you can take a unit with the Forlorn Hope, and that means a single unit in the General's force that has been deployed at the start of the clash may make a free double time maneuver at the start of the clash as if they had the Vanguard special rule. A unit that already has Vanguard cannot use this boon to move twice, so there's no moving 4 times with your sharp rifles, in other words. There is, however, such a thing as moving 2 Tristans with a bunch of Royal Engineer Sappers up the board for 15 points, and that's going to put the pressure on your opponent very, very early on. Ready for Anything is an upgrade for 20 points where a single unit in the General's force that has been deployed at the start of the clash, so nothing in reserve, can begin the clash with the On Lookout status. Now, On Lookout allows you to take opportunity fire at your opponent. When your opponent activates a unit, you first get a moment, a reaction phase where you can do opportunity fire, he then moves, and then you can do another opportunity fire option if you sort of, for instance, have to wait until he moved a bit to get a clean shot to it. You can also do this with units with a strong aerial profile so that you can immediately start shooting at any aircraft doing an attack run when these aircraft are released somewhere next year. I think this one is also an incredibly strong filler. For instance, if you've got 4 of these Mordred heavy artillery pieces with a good angle around the battlefield, this is going to be very, very devastating. Mad Minute is a 20 points upgrade where you can use this special command to an infantry unit that is about to make a ranged attack against an enemy unit that has the light category. Mind you, this is a special command. It's not in bold text, although it might have been, because that means you have to play a card to do so. Your opponent can try to then counter it, and if the command is successful, you're adding 2 attack dice to the attack die pool, which is perhaps not as tasty, I think, as the Ready for Anything. Mad Minute is, yeah, it should have been cheaper in points if you ask me. If you're using the Cavalry, Countercharge is an exceptionally good one. It clocks in at 30 points, and that means once per round during the reaction step, the General can issue a special command to a unit that has the On Lookout status. The Cavalry especially doesn't always just get to go and charge ahead because it only has the melee attack option, but why not just do a regular advance, go on lookout, and then rely on Countercharge to get you to the enemy, because you can then do a charge maneuver, meaning you move double time, and a close quarter attack against a target during the reaction step. And this boon, whilst still being one of the more expensive ones, can be used once per round, which isn't once per battle. So if you want to have your cavalry units acting like ping pong balls across the table and sort of anticipating your opponent's moves with a massive 16-inch bubble, yeah, definitely take this boon. You're going to have a lot of fun with it. The Standard of Albion clocks in at 40 points, which is a once per clash ability, where your general can issue a special command to a unit with a crown, infantry and commander traits at the start of its activation. And if the command is successfully issued, this unit automatically passes any discipline test it is required to make until the end of the round. Unfortunately, this boon has to be used on the one unit type that I would never reinforce too heavily, i.e. the command rifle platoon, and so that makes an already very expensive unit even more expensive. So yeah, this one, that's a no for me. The next one is a lot better though. That one is Tactical Brilliance at 45 points, and that means that you're starting the first round of the clash with one extra card in your hand, so your hand limit is increased by 1 for the duration of the round. Mind you, if you don't spend any cards at all, it doesn't transfer to the next round, because you have to discard the one that you have too many if you still have that many in your hand in round 2. And that was it for me for today. Hopefully you found the video useful and it helps you building a crown force if you are interested in it. If it was useful, remember to hit the thumbs up button, and I hope to see you in the next video, which is probably going to be the Empire one, unless something big comes up in the meanwhile. Until then, bye!